That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Rustin, the fourth film directed by George C. Wolfe, which is being released courtesy of Netflix on November 17th, 2023. It premiered at the 2023 Telluride Film Festival and played directly thereafter at the Toronto International Film Festival.
Do I know a George C. Wolfe movie?
Well, we reviewed his last film, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom.
Oh, okay.
He's a very prolific theater director. His previous films also include Nights in Rodanthe, You're Not You with Hilary Swank and Loretta Devine, and of course Ma Rainey. He's directed a couple of very notable television features, including Lackawanna Blues and The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
I see Dustin Lance Black co-wrote the screenplay.
Yes, and of course Dustin Lance Black has written several queer portraits, including Melk and J. Edgar, although I don't think J. Edgar is very good. This was also co-written by Julian Breece, who wrote a couple episodes of When They See Us for Ava DuVernay.
This movie is kind of like a biopic about the civil rights activist Bayard Rustin and how he helped organize the March on Washington. The 1963 March on Washington.
Yes,
where of course MLK
gave his I Have a Dream speech, in which was credited with catalyzing the Civil Rights Act a year later in 1964. So it was a very momentous, important moment, and the film is kind of showcasing all the drama going on behind the organization of that through the perspective of Bayard Rustin, played by Colman Domingo.
But the drama, which we didn't mention, is because Bayard Rustin was an openly gay man.
Yes.
What did you think of this movie?
Well, my pull quote is...
Oh, sorry, what's your pull quote?
The film is Colman Domingo's shining hour as unsung civil rights activist Bayard Rustin, but the script's well-intentioned recuperation of this legacy doesn't match its leading man's prowess in a rendering often neutered by sentimentality. So I think that it is an important film. I think that in the trajectory of... it's very telling that how many decades ago did we have Malcolm X and movies about Medgar Evers, and we're finally getting around to recuperating Black queer history. So I'm glad that it exists and shines a light on this neglected civil rights activist legacy, but at the same time, I think it's not quite at the height that it should be.
It's produced by the Obama's production company.
Yes, Barack and Michelle did produce this.
And President Obama gave Bayard Rustin
posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So there's all of those interesting things. The screening I happened to see it at was with GLAAD's first ever Black Queer Creative Summit. So I think that was really the perfect audience to see this and experience with this, because there is some levity. And because the screenwriters kind of paint in this love triangle for Bayard in the background with this young white freedom rider named Tom, and then a closeted black pastor affiliated with the NAACP named Elias Taylor in this film, played by Johnny Ramey, and Gus Halper plays the young white love interest. So those were all kind of adding a little bit of titillation. But it also did feel very much like something that if I had walked into this blind, I would think that this is Ryan Murphy light.
Oh, wow. The scope of the story is pretty narrow. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about what the scope is?
Well, I think the worst part of the film is really the opening. I feel it's a bit, to use a term you like to use, crunchy.
Oh.
And I was... It took me a little bit to kind of settle into it, and I think Colman Domingo's performance is excellent, but navigating him and MLK, played by Ameen, and it opens a couple years earlier than the March on Washington in 1960, when the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was trying to infiltrate the DNC in Los Angeles. And they were trying to do this, MLK and Bayard, by going around the NAACP, which of course angered the executive secretary at the time, Roy Wilkins, played by Chris Rock, who I think is a bit distracting in this. And more importantly, U.S. Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr., played by Jeffrey Wright, who was himself a womanizer that was on record doing nefarious things, but clearly was homophobic, at least presented in this film, and did not like Bayard Rustin, and was also jealous of Dr. King. So Jeffrey Wright threatens to leak a story to the media that MLK and Bayard are lovers because of them trying to infiltrate the DNC. And Bayard Rustin tenders his resignation to MLK, thinking that his friend will back him up, but he doesn't. He accepts it. And of course, for the next several years, we see Bayard working with the WRL, the War Resistance League, and kind of staying out of the limelight until he is kind of asked back into the fold by A. Philip Randolph, played by Glynn Turman, to be his deputy director to organize this momentous March on Washington. And of course, what that means is the position that he served means he was kind of robbed of the real credit that he went into pulling all of this together.
Because he really could be said to be responsible for all of it.
Yes, instead of just kind of historically the footnote that he's often listed as, who, much like Medgar Evers, who pops up here and of course is assassinated before the March on Washington transpires, is often kind of in these recuperations. I mean, there's a film about him. He's dead and it goes to Mississippi, but much like in Till with Danielle Deadwyler, he shows up, Medgar Evers. So in that scope, I think that it's very interesting. I just feel like it could be a lot stronger, even in its queerness, which I think is playing it really light. Even though we see, kissing and some lovemaking scenes, the film touches upon kind of the danger, because it was illegal to be gay. There's a bar raid because Colman, much to the chagrin of his white lover, is having an affair with this black pastor and bringing him to this bar, and they almost get caught there. What really has demeaned Bayard Rustin is, I believe in 1942 in Pasadena, he was caught with two young white men and was charged with sodomy or some law, whatever, something along those lines. And of course, that was forever held against him. And then the Senator Strom Thurmond published that arrest record prior to the March on Washington, trying to also demean Bayard Rustin. So those are all very interesting elements. I think the script is more focused on kind of trying to tie in bits and pieces of the man's life before this 1960 period, because he was a Quaker, he was raised by his grandparents. There was another incident in the 40s where he was severely beaten for refusing to sit in the back of a bus, which kind of ruined the right side of his dentitia. So there's actually, I feel, some really good makeup done on Colman Domingo to show, that how this man was beaten so severely that his mouth is disfigured, and which also affects his speech pattern. But there was a lot of cheering and I think joy coming from the audience, which would really be unexpected, because I told another friend that I was going to see this. He's like, "Oh, that sounds like a fun time," and it isn't as heavy, I think, as you would expect, and that's also because, of course, this man wasn't assassinated, so it has that going for it. But it ends abruptly with the march is a success. You get some other notable people in there, like Divine Joy Randolph shows up at the march as Mahalia Jackson, and there's a lot of other notable people in the supporting cast, like CCH Pounder as Anna Arnold Hedgeman. There's a really nice moment with Audra McDonald playing civil rights activist Ella Baker. Like as I already said, I think Chris Rock and his older man, gray hair, is a little distracting. Jeffrey Wright is very easy to hate in this, and he only has a couple scenes, but I think they're also enjoyable. It's, of course, always nice to see Glynn Turman, who's also in the recent The Outlaw Johnny Black. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to appreciate here, but ultimately I just wanted it to be so much more. I would say Colman Domingo is probably deserving of some Oscar campaigning, but with somehow Danielle Deadwyler not getting nominated last year for Till, who knows how well that's going to go.
Okay. The film ends with the March on Washington, and then does it say anything else about
There's
Bayard?
Well, Bayard apparently made a comment about how he wasn't above picking up the trash. They actually show him while the rest of the NAACP leaders get to go meet in the Oval Office with the president after this march. He stays behind and helps pick up trash. But it says he met a man that he fell in love with named Walter Nagel in 1967 and stayed with him until his death, until 77, and that was about it. I had to laugh because there were people laughing and snickering behind me like, oh, I guess he ended up with a white man based on that name. I think the best moment of the screening, however, was the character Tom is chatting with Bayard, and Bayard Rustin saying like, I think what you want from me I can't give you, like a kind of a settled down, stable relationship. He says maybe when I'm older, and some woman in the audience goes, boy.
Because he's already looking old.
But again, I think that, and that's also a testament to, I'm assuming most people will be watching this at home on Netflix, and maybe this would be better served to see as a theatrical experience, but.
What would you give this film?
2.5.
Out of 5. Anything else?
No.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.